Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another PS5 video. I say another PS5 video. It's been a long time since we've done a dedicated PS5 video on the channel. However, we do now have the release of etaHEN version 1.8b by Lightning Mods and a new version of Itemzflow to go along with it. So today I'm going to show you guys how to get everything set up because there is a new plugins feature in etaHEN that requires a little bit of extra setup. It's not quite as simple as just running the payload. We need to get the plugins installed as well. And of course, I'll also do an overview going over all of the new features. So let's go ahead and dive straight into it. So to begin with, of course, we're going to need to head on over to our exploit host. I'm still using IdleSauce's host as my daily exploit host for the PS5. So we're going to run that, run the jailbreak. And once we have the jailbreak up and running, we're going to load the etaHEN payload. It's already been updated to version 1.8 in the exploit host, and most other exploit hosts will likely have updated it by the time this video goes live. So what we're going to do is get that up and running. Now you'll notice that you don't get a lot of notifications when you first run this because you probably won't have the plugins installed initially. So you actually don't have many of the features running when you initially load it. Okay, so once the payload loads, if we head into our settings and scroll down to the debug settings, you'll see that the debug settings are no longer the debug settings. They're now the etaHEN toolbox. And a lot of the debug settings options have been stripped from this menu. And that's mainly because a lot of those debug settings options weren't really applicable to retail consoles anyway. A lot of them did not work, and some of them would even brick your console if used incorrectly, like IDU mode. You could get stuck in IDU mode, for example. So those options have all been removed. Instead, you just have the debug settings options that were actually applicable to our jailbroken PS4, like the package installer, which we need to install our apps. And also in the utilities section, we still have access to the Blu-ray license activation so that you can get your media codecs, your media decoders working for your Blu-rays without having to connect to PSN. So those options are still in there, but instead we have some new options. We've got our plugins, which we don't have any plugins right now. We'll install those later. And we also have our utilities section. So in here, we have an option to allow the data folder access in app sandboxes. So when apps run, they have their own sandboxed location, their own sandbox directory where they don't have access to the rest of the file system. So you can allow access to the data folder in these app sandboxes. May be useful for some homebrew applications to be able to read and write to the data folder when they normally wouldn't have access to it. We've also got the ability to allow FTP access to the dev directory. That's normally restricted because if you overwrite something in the dev directory, you could easily brick your console, which is not advised. But if you know what you're doing, you can enable this so that you can access the dev directory. And then also you have the ability to enable or disable PS5 debug, which is used, of course, for being able to connect mod tools and remote debugging software to the console. So with that, we've also got rest mode options. So we've got the ability to delay the toolbox activation in seconds, automatically kill etaHEN services daemon when entering rest mode, and also automatically close open games when entering rest mode. So the reason for these options is mainly that rest mode is still pretty unstable at the moment. When you're running etaHEN, you want to put it into rest mode and recover from rest mode to continue running the etaHEN payload without having to reboot and reload the jailbreak. That's the general idea. But it's still quite unstable. Sometimes certain parts of etaHEN will not reload properly when coming out of rest mode. So these options are to kind of help you improve the stability when recovering from rest mode. So for example, delaying the toolbox activation by a certain number of seconds once you've recovered from rest mode might help with the stability and getting it reloaded properly. And then also these other options as well can help with that. So you can kind of tweak these settings to see if you can improve the stability with entering and recovering from rest mode when using etaHEN. So that's why those settings are there. Then we've also got the services section. So we can enable and disable the FTP server, the Klog server, and the direct package installer. I've already gone ahead and disabled the Klog server. I would recommend disabling the things that you're not going to be using because etaHEN does run a lot of different things in the background. FTP server, Klog server, a direct package installer, the PS5 debug is running. There's a lot of different things all running at once. So disabling, a lot of the things that you don't use might help kind of run etaHEN in more of a lightweight situation where it's maybe less likely to cause crashes and slowdowns. So I would certainly recommend disabling anything that you don't use, and it's handy that we now have the option to do that. We also have the option here to install the Homebrew Store directly from the menu. This is really handy, especially when setting up the jailbreak for the first time, because you can just load the Homebrew Store, get it installed, and then use it to install any additional applications. So definitely useful here. We can press X on that and get the Homebrew Store installed. Obviously requires an internet connection. That goes without saying, but if we head back here to our home page, you can see the Homebrew Store has now been installed. So if we head back once again to our settings, go back down to our etaHEN toolbox, we also have the option to automatically open after etaHEN loads. So once you're finished loading the etaHEN payload, it can automatically boot you to the home menu, to the settings page, to the etaHEN toolbox, or to Itemzflow if it is installed. So you just select that. So if we select this option, if you always use Itemzflow every time you use your PS5, you're always going on Itemzflow to load one of your PS5 backups, then enabling this is quite handy. So as soon as the payload's loaded, it will boot you straight into Itemzflow and get you in there much faster without having to launch it yourself. And then the final option here, as you can see, is we have an About section, which is basically a credits section that goes over all the contributors and all the donators to the project. So yeah, awesome stuff there. So in order to complete etaHEN, we do need the latest version of Itemzflow, which will automatically install the core plugins that we need here. So if we head over to our Homebrew Store, which we were able to conveniently install from the etaHEN toolbox. So once we get this up and running, we can go to our store apps, Itemzflow, and download and install. We've got everything installed. Let's just make sure it gets installed first before closing the Homebrew Store. Yep, there we go. So we can now press the options button to quit out of the Homebrew Store, and we now have Itemzflow installed. If we press options, go to information, it should be version 1.07, which it is. So we can go ahead and run this. So when you first load Itemzflow and you don't have any plugins installed, you should get a message saying that it's installed the required etaHEN plugins. You'll get that message pop up. However, those plugins will not be active until you reboot and load etaHEN again. So once you get that message saying that it has successfully installed the plugins, click OK, boot into Itemzflow, and then exit out of there and reboot the console. And then once you've rebooted the console, we're going to go back on the exploit host again, load up the jailbreak again, and run the etaHEN payloads so that it can load those plugins. So once it loads, you'll see that this time when it loads, you'll get a lot more notifications popping up on the left because it's loading more things. You'll now have Illusions patches loaded there, and the Elf Loader plugin will also be loaded. So you're going to wait for that to succeed. And then if you go back on Itemzflow again, we'll now have those plugins applied. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the changes that have been made in this new version of Itemzflow. So if we take a look at a PS5 game, we have the dumper option, which now has the option to dump DLC. There's also been some improvements made to the dumper so that you can just, if there's files that haven't been loaded, there's a kind of check for that so that it will not, freeze on files that have not been loaded. Which can be handy there. It can take longer to dump, but it is an improvement so that, games that have language files that are not loaded will not just get stuck. There is a way around that now in the dumper. So that's handy. And there's also just been general improvements to the dumper to make it more reliable. So that is a handy feature. If we head over to Bloodborne, we can see that it also shows your time played now in the top. So you know how much time you've actually spent in the game. But the big improvement is with Illusions patches. So if we go into the trainer section and press X, you can see that we have access to Illusions patches, and we can specify exactly what patch we want to apply, which is something that we haven't had access to yet. This is something we've had the ability to do on the PS4 for a long time, but Illusions patches on the PS5 worked a bit differently, where you loaded a payload, the libhijacker payload with the cheats, and then you ran the game and it would just apply a blanket patch to the game, which would apply a bunch of patches at once. You couldn't really pick and choose which ones you wanted. There was a couple of options where if you held down a button while launching the game, it would switch to a different type of patch, but you didn't have the option to specify exactly which patch you wanted, which ones you wanted to use with each other. So with this, we can say skip intros will enable that. And then we'll say that we also want maybe we want to disable motion blur. And maybe we also want 60 FPS with delta time. And of course, maybe the resolution patch for 720p. And then once you've selected the patches that you want, you can launch it from within Itemzflow, and that will go ahead and apply the patches. So if you wait a few seconds, it'll take a bit longer to load. You'll be stuck on the loading screen a bit longer than normal, but you will eventually get a notification saying those patches have been applied. So 4 patches, 158 patch lines applied, just like on PS4. And you can see that we now have those patches applied. It skipped the intros, and you can see we have the 60 FPS patch by Lance McDonald applied. So that's what Illusion's cheat plugin does. We've also got an elf loader plugin. If we go into our settings here, scroll back down to our debug settings and go to our plugins, you can see both plugins showing here. We've got Illusion's cheat plugin and we've got the elf loader plugin. So the elf loader plugin is the etaHEN plugin that runs the elf loader on port 9022. So you can send payloads on 9022 with a payload injector on your PC or on another device to get those payloads loaded on the PS5. So that's just constantly running in the background. You can also disable these plugins. So you can disable the cheats plugin if you don't want it to load any cheats when you're loading up a game. You have the option to do that. And any other plugins that you install, for example, there's a Black Ops 6 leak plugin, which I cannot link or leave any links to. But with that plugin, which allows you to host your own game and join a game in Black Ops 6, the leaked version of it. So in order to do that, you install the plugins to the data folder on the hard drive. You can see the path there, data/etaHEN/plugins, which you can do just by connecting on FTP, going to that location, and then copying any additional plugins in that folder. So you can copy like the Black Ops 6 leaked plugin in there. And then once you add new plugins, you need to reboot your console once again, and then load the etaHEN payload to then have that plugin load. So you can see with the Black Ops 6 leaked plugin, it just comes up saying waiting for Black Ops 6 all the time. So of course, that's going to get kind of annoying if you're not trying to load Black Ops 6, because maybe you don't necessarily want to be using that plugin at that specific time. So that's where the plugins option in etaHEN Toolbox comes in handy, because if you're not planning to load Black Ops 6, but you have that plugin enabled, you can just go into this section in the etaHEN Toolbox and disable that plugin, and that will terminate it so that you're no longer getting that annoying prompt. So you can do that with any plugins that you don't want running at the time, because they will run automatically on launch of etaHEN, but you can then disable them here in the settings. You can also install your plugins to a USB drive instead, which might be handy depending, because you can like unplug the USB drive before loading etaHEN so those plugins don't get loaded if you don't want them loaded at a certain point. So, you know, you've got some options there. If you want to install your plugins to a USB drive instead of the hard drive, all you have to do is create an etaHEN folder on the root of your USB drive, and then a plugins folder inside that folder, and then just copy any plugins into the plugins folder on your USB. And then when you have that USB drive plugged in and you load etaHEN, it will load those plugins from that location. So elf files that can be loaded with the elf loader are kind of single use. So they run, they execute their task, and then they exit. Whereas plugins are things that are running constantly in the background all the time. So you've got your etaHEN, your elf loader plugin for your payloads, and then you've got your plugins for stuff that runs in the background. And the SDK includes information about creating your own plugins and all of that good stuff. So that is basically it. We've got a brand new version of etaHEN bringing a ton of additional features to the PS5, along with a new version of Itemzflow to go along with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.